Hey, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. This is John Jerkowitz. Um, I feel real special and real honored this evening to have Meilani MacDonald with me. We're going to continue talking about a topic I picked up on last week. And if you had a chance to join us last week, Thursday, I was talking about personal branding and folks who go through the traditional interview process looking for work and how they can use that personal branding process to take control of their interviews. If you remember, too, at the end of the Hangout, I kind of gave you a little bit of a teaser, and I talked about the fact that that whole personal branding operation, or modus operandi, if you will, can be used for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, small business owners, can be used effectively to kind of create a foothold in the marketplace and to help them kind of distinguish themselves from their competition. And so that's why I invited Meilani this evening. She deals with entrepreneurs. She deals with small business people. She's done so for a number of years. She brings a wealth of knowledge and experience. And this is probably the easiest part of the Hangout for me because I'm going to turn it over to you, Meilani, and I'm going to let you talk about some of what you do, and we'll take it from there.
Awesome. Thank you, John. And
I always wanted to do that.
it's okay. I always wanted to hear that. Thank you so much, John. My name is Meilani MacDonald. I am a brand identity and outreach strategy consultant, as John said. My background basically comes from being in the workforce. I was a public information associate for the water district in my town. My job there was to reach out to the public and to teach them about the water supply, to get them to buy in to really wanting to improve and keep the water quality high, and to basically not trash it and to conserve it. So I was really getting a lot of good experiences with going out and building collaborations, reaching out to the public, and getting them to participate in our conservation programs. I did a lot of strategy planning at that time because it was, here's the campaign, here's the goal that we want to accomplish, now we have to create the campaign to accomplish that goal. That was kind of fortuitous because as the economy began to crash and so many of us got laid off, I was actually planning to work there till I retired, but I became one of those layoffs in the down economy. So that's actually how I found myself being an entrepreneur or a solopreneur myself. What I saw around me were a lot of people getting laid off. I mean, in the millions, right? But all these people had a wonderful talent of some sort. They were really good at what they were doing at their jobs. With a lack of jobs out there in the economy to go to and unable to find work, a lot of them, I think, were spurred into becoming small business owners and entrepreneurs themselves. They started up their own businesses just because, like me, they couldn't find other work. And then something kind of crazy happened. They realized they enjoyed it. They liked working for themselves. But when they have a talent, when people have a particular skill, a particular talent, they're really great at making widgets. They weren't maybe necessarily knowing how to introduce their widgets to the public because that was the other department. That was my department that did that. So that's where I saw the opportunity to start helping the small business owners and entrepreneurs because that was my talent and my department at where I was working, was to bring the stuff out to the public and to do that marketing and that strategy planning. So that's kind of how I started in my journey as a solopreneur and helping people use social media and reaching out to the public to tell them about how great their own services and goods are.
If you had to go back in time to that moment that you started the journey you're on now, what piece of advice would you give yourself sitting where you're at today and going back to yourself then that might help you a bit more?
Wow, that's a great question. My advice to myself would be, don't spend the 2 years that you're looking for jobs trying to get back into the workforce, just trying to get back into the workforce. Start planning about being a solopreneur now, in case in 2 years' time, when you take a look around and you're finding out that either there's no jobs, or you're now too old to get hired, or you're overqualified, and they really would rather have the 25-year-old that takes half the pay, that you're starting new then. Start your learning now. Don't give up the job hunt, but start your learning now. Start figuring out what you have to do as a solopreneur, any classes that you're going to take, any professional skill developments that you're going to take. Start doing that now.
Okay. Why do you think there are so many solopreneurs today? There's been an increase, and why do you think that is?
Well, I think it is because of the economy crashing the way it did, and so many jobs being lost. I mean, again, millions of people found themselves without work and found themselves unable to find work to replace the job that they had. And so, faced with that prospect, they started looking around and saying, well, it's up to me. I've got to make it happen myself.
You know, I went through a similar experience that I actually ended up losing 3 jobs during the 90s, none of them on my own accord, and I could take a picture of my backyard where I was raking leaves one November afternoon and decided if I was getting mad at the boss again, I was going upstairs in the bathroom and looking at him in the mirror.
Right.
So I think a lot of us have gone that same path. What would you say to a person who's in the process of saying, you know, boy, this is something I'd really like to do. I see people like Meilani, John, other people. I see them on these hangouts. It seems like they really enjoy doing what they're doing. I've got a good job. I'm not in a situation where I have to do something, but I want to do something. What steps would you advise them to take to move towards that?
Well, I would say before you leave your job and before you leave that financial security, you want to start dipping your toes in the water, because there are a lot of challenges that solopreneurs and small business owners face that you don't know about or think about or come across while you're still employed. For example, my friend Dr. Simone Ravis, who is she's a coach, a career coach, but she comes from a psychiatry background. And so her clientele that come to her to help them figure out what is blocking me and what's getting in my way, they're usually self-inflicted blocks. And she was on my Hangout show and telling us that there's so many misconceptions. The biggest things that she hears are, gosh, I thought I was going to be working shorter hours and making more money. And what they ended up doing was working more hours just to try to make the same money that they were making in their paid job, at least for the first several years. So they've got to be really prepared that it's not just 9 to 5 hours. Oftentimes, and all the solopreneurs that I know in my local area, they get up and they start going to networking mixers. Around here in the desert, they start at 7:30 in the morning, those networking mixers. And then I'll see the same people at the networking mixers that are the after working hours networking mixers that start at 6 o'clock in the evening. So they're going from 7:30 in the morning till 8 o'clock in the evening. And they're not taking a lot of time off. They're not taking the vacations. So you have to be really in love with what you're doing. You have to be really in love with the freedom that you get in exchange for dedicating so much of your time and your life and your energy to your own business.
Yeah, as you were speaking, I thought of something. When I started this business in '99, 4 of my 6 kids were still at home. And I remember one of them, who was in 6th grade at the time, came up to me one time and said, well, you own your own business now, right? And I said, yeah. And he goes, does that mean we're rich? okay? And I kept looking for the bag of money and I never found it. I think, you know, I was really fortunate because there is a marked difference in our genealogical age, so to speak. And I worked for a Fortune 5 company, and the story I'm going to tell you, this wouldn't happen today, okay? But when I worked in a training and development area for this company, I was allowed to consult with our vendors and charge them, and I was allowed to keep the money.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, and you won't see that today. There's probably attorneys everywhere watching this, clutching their chest and going, "Oh my God!" But I cut my teeth doing that by basically learning a lot of things in a safe environment, while twice a month the paycheck went in the bank. So I think that's really good advice you're giving people.
And also, if you've got the income to do it, start, putting aside a bunch of money to save up to help carry you through those beginning stages, so that during the first years when you're building up your business and you don't have that income flow yet, you have some money to rely on over there. Now, I'm not a financial person, but I just attended a hangout recently with someone who was speaking about that very topic of the finances, and she's actually going to be on my TGIF hangout in September. That's Stephanie Sims, and she had some really great advice. So I don't lay claim to that advice myself. Just passing it on.
So when a solopreneur finds you or a small business person finds you and says, "Meilani, help," could you kind of walk us through a process you use with these folks?
Absolutely. The first thing we do is we talk about their objectives. Oftentimes I find that they have come to me and they have this business and they have this idea, I'm just going to go into business. But they haven't really sat down and thought about it and put it down logically on paper. So we talk about what their objectives are. And objectives can be lofty, and it can be your dreams, so you can make them as lofty as you want. For example, in 10 years, I want 3 stores open, and in 15 years, I want another 3 stores open. I want to increase my sales by this much. I want to sell widgets all around the world instead of just my local area. So they can be very lofty objectives, and we start putting those down in terms of what's an immediate objective, what's something you want to have happen right away, where do you see yourself in a year, where would you like to be in 5 years, and as far out as they feel willing to go. Now, oftentimes once we've got their objectives down, they look at it and they feel overwhelmed. Oh my God, did I really say this is what I want? I have no idea how to get from here to there. So the next thing we do is we set some goals, and goals are like bite-sized chunks. So if your objective is, I want to be known outside my local area, and I want to really increase my business beyond my local borders, well, one of the goals then might be create a social media profile and start reaching out through online means and do networking online. That's a bite-sized chunk that they can accomplish. Okay, yes, I can go and do some research on the various different social media avenues out there. I can figure out which ones might be best for what my service is. So for example, if it's a very visual thing or a product that is sort of very appealing to people's design nature, they might want to do Pinterest or Instagram or Vine, because on Pinterest you see a lot of home decor, you see a lot of fashion and beauty and body products, and there's a lot of women on Pinterest, and people are going there to do shopping. So if you have a product that falls into those categories and your audience is made up of a lot of women, that might be a good social site for you to really concentrate on. So we start thinking about, yes, I can do that. I can do my research, and I can figure out what social sites to be on, and then, yes, I can create a profile and then learn how to use that site really well. So that becomes a goal, and that goal is a bite-sized chunk. And we set a series of goals, and again, we break it down into what's some immediate goals, what are some ongoing goals, and what are some goals that have various time frames. Once they have their goals down, all of a sudden they start seeing their path. Okay, I see my path forward. I see the way I need to go. And it feels less overwhelming and like, okay, I just need to reach this goal. And every time they reach a goal, they've got a stepping stone onto their lofty objectives. Now, once they have their goals down, it's pretty easy to create your action list or your strategy list of the action steps that you need to take to reach that goal. So, for example, in the example I was using, the action steps there were: one, research. Usually research is always the first action step. Research the different social media avenues out there and figure out which one is a conducive one for your business. Number two, create your profile on that social media avenue. Number three, start learning about how to do social media marketing effectively. Again, education is always one of those usually tasks in there. Educate yourself. Number four, once you learn, for example, how to make a great post, what makes a post interesting to your audience, then start making those posts. In that realm, we also talk about their audiences, their brand identity, and this is where the branding really comes into it, because before they can start reaching out to other people to sell their goods and services, they have to be able to really describe those very well. My dog's going to start barking in just a minute.
That's okay.
Somebody just came home, and whenever somebody just comes home,
well, this is reality, you see. So
reality TV. So, back to the branding part. They have to really be able to describe their goods and services to their potential audiences. So the first thing I do is I ask them, how do you want your reputation to sound? What do you want to be your brand identity? How do you want your customers to feel about you when they think of you? What do you want them to think about you? And I first have them write down the phrases that they want the customers and potential customers to think, because what we think is a precursor to what we feel. And there's a difference. I'll give you an example. John, I think you make a lot of sense. When I listened to your HOA last week about personal branding in an interview, I think you had a lot of good information. That is what I think about you. Now, the feelings that made me feel are, I feel I can trust John. I feel like he's going to be able to provide me with good advice, and I can trust his opinion, because trust is a feeling. I feel like I want to watch John's HOA again, so I feel loyal. So the thoughts that I'm having are leading to the feelings that I'm having. And as we all know, people really like to make decisions based on their feelings and how they feel about another person. So then, after we do that, should I keep going? Because I'm just
let me interrupt you just for a minute, because you got me all excited here. Okay, there's a real synchronicity to what you're saying, and when we were in the green room before we started the broadcast, I was sharing with Meilani. I just got done with a 2-day and a half seminar group out of Chattanooga, Tennessee, that actually does a 9-week live preparation for solopreneurs, small business owners that are thinking about starting their own business. Very affordable. And the one thing they talked about this afternoon over and over and over again was creating that trust. Whether you're a coach and consultant doing hangouts, whether you're selling widgets, the neat thing about it is they brought some of the products some of their more successful businesses had produced, and just coincidentally they were all food. Okay, um, and so that was kind of interesting, but the integrity, the trust, when I give you the information, um, that really resonates with me. I got a question for you.
Sure.
Share with us what your greatest success has been so far since you've begun this journey.
Oh my goodness. I think my greatest success, honestly, has just been the fact that I've been able to build my own reputation and my own brand identity. And it's a personal brand identity because I'm a solopreneur, like you say. I don't have widgets, so I'm not building a product brand, I'm building a personal brand. But in my community, I live in a smaller community. It's near Palm Springs, California, and the greater Palm Springs area is still smaller than the nearest big city. So my little town has 20,000 people population only, but in the greater area, it ranges from 350,000 during the hot season when everybody leaves to 500,000 when all the snowbirds come down to escape winter.
Mm-hmm.
So in my local circles, though, I'm really becoming the person that my locals are going to whenever they want to learn something about social media or Google Plus and Hangouts in particular. When they're ready to start learning about these Hangouts are really interesting. I just want to watch them for a while, but maybe I'll start, using them. And when I'm being introduced, I'm getting more and more public speaking gigs now, which is nice,
Mm-hmm.
as I'm being asked to be a presenter for business groups like the Coachella Valley Women's Business Center and the American Business Women's Association. So actual well-respected business groups in my area are seeking me as a presenter to come and speak to their audiences about a variety of topics. So to me, that feels really great when they're coming and asking me to present. That makes me feel good, makes me feel like, okay, cool. I'm doing a good job here. People are starting to think of me as the authority in the fields that I'm representing.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting you walk down that path a little bit, because I was sitting next to a gentleman for the last 2 days who is about 70 years old. He's run about 8 or 9 successful businesses, and he wasn't bashful about sharing it with anybody. And at one point in time during the course of the conversation, he looked at me and said, "Why do you do the stuff you do? You got trouble getting a real job?" And I said, it's kind of interesting. You kind of pick and choose who you share everything you do with, because I went on to tell a couple other people, sometimes when you talk about coaching and you talk about life coaching and career coaching, people think you're sitting in the parking lot in the van smoking weed. Okay? They still have that, oh, that's some new age hippie stuff. Okay? Harvard Business Review last month, I believe, had an extended article about CEOs embracing career and business coaching in medium to large size companies and it becoming SOP. Those folks bringing in people like you, bringing in people like me to kind of help them chart their future, because the future isn't what the past was. It's not even in the same galaxy. So that kind of leads me to my next point. I read something on LinkedIn here earlier today where they talked about an 80% plus increase in entrepreneurs and solopreneurs in the past 18 months to 2 years, I believe. In your opinion, why do you think that is? Other than I'm out of work, this is an avenue of me to earn some income, but why do you think people are attracted to this profession?
Well, I know you said other than, but I want to mention that. I think there were a lot of people that were laid off that were looking for work for a few years, and finally were like, okay, it's been a few years, there's no jobs, I'm kind of giving up on that route, I'm going to go start my own business.
Hmm.
I think we're seeing a lot of that. Now, of those people, a lot of them are saying, you know, this running my own business and not being a slave to the corporate cog is kind of nice. And I really do like the freedom of being able to actually spend time with my family, even though it may mean I'm spending more time on business because I don't have a 6 o'clock time card that I'm out of work after 6, I'm free. But what it does mean is I can take 2 hours break in the middle of the day to attend my kids' game. Then when we get home and they're getting ready for bed, I can burn some midnight oil and do some work. So they might be doing longer days, but they're doing it because they're fitting more stuff that they actually want to do that's important to them in the day. I think that that's one thing, and I think that people are really feeling out of sorts. I mean, we see a lot of backlash against the corporate lifestyle right now. We see a lot of that. People are feeling betrayed because they grew up, especially in a certain generation. Not so much the kids today, but certainly people in our generations grew up with the idea that you find a great job, you work for this company, you spend a lot of years working for it, and then you retire and you're going to be taken care of. And instead, what they're finding is that they dedicated a lot of time and dedicated a lot of serious and sincere talent to the companies, and then the companies are just throwing them out and not helping them have a nice, comfortable retirement. Always going to the bottom line. Then what's happening is we're seeing companies where maybe they had 3 positions, that the positions were administrative and they were outreach and, let's say, bookkeeping or something. Well, they laid off those 3 positions during the down economy, and now what they want to do is hire one person to do all those 3 positions, and they only want to pay them $15 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
So people are now saying, wait a minute, I had a job, it was great when it lasted, at least they were paying me well, they valued the talent, the skill that I brought to the company, but these new job offers I'm seeing, when I do see a job offer, they want me to do 3 jobs worth of work for 1/3 the pay that I was getting before. Well, if I'm going to do 3 times the amount of work for 1/3 the pay, I might as well just do it for myself and start my own business. And if I'm going to build up from there back to where I was before, let it be me that it's benefiting. Let me do that for myself instead of for somebody else.
If I get mad at the boss, I'll go in the bathroom and look at him or her in the mirror and yell at them.
Right.
Oh, hell, I'm going to just dive right in. The glass ceiling is still there, correct?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
It's been my experience, yeah.
Have we come any closer to shattering it or to removing it, or are we just saying look to the right because we've moved it to the left?
That's a great question. I'm not really sure I'm qualified to answer it. I'm not
from your personal experience.
Well, from my experience and well, let me give you a couple of stories to illustrate what my experience has been. And this happened many, many years ago, the first story. When I worked for a PR agency, and the client was an oil company client, and they were coming in from out of town, out from Texas somewhere, to meet with the head of the PR company. So the head of the PR company took along with him his top couple of writers and the executive assistant. Now, the executive assistant was a female, and when they went to the meeting with these sort of good old boys from Texas, they got a message afterwards, because from the executive assistant's perspective, they were bringing her along because they wanted her to learn more about the business and what goes on at these kinds of meetings, and about the strategy and the PR and what the majors talk about in the meetings. She wasn't experienced in it, but they wanted her to become experienced in it. So what happened was, after the meeting, they got a very nasty letter from the guy from Texas, and he said, well, I don't know how you folks do business out there, but I'm a married man. I'm not accustomed to you bringing along a woman for me. And the
Oh,
executive assistant, yeah, she was understandably pissed and insulted very much. But what put salt into the wound was that the boss, instead of coming to her defense and saying, dude, you have this all wrong, and how dare you say something like that about my employee, she's a very stand-up woman, said, we're really sorry. He really kind of like bowed down to the guy and didn't really defend her honor, shall we say. So that was just also very disheartening and insulting, and it was just an example of the kind of things that women, I think, in the workplace deal with on a regular basis. Another place where I worked, we had our engineer there was a woman, and she was top-notch. She really knew her stuff. She went everything by the book. She expected all the vendors to go by the book as well, and they kind of didn't like her for that. So they ended up making life for her really miserable until she left. And they ended up replacing her with someone else who is from the good old boys school, but he ended up being an alcoholic that you could smell his breath from like all the way down the hallway. And he ended up being someone that got in some legal trouble for various reasons that I can't discuss. So then when they got rid of him, they replaced it with another guy who was a good old boy who ended up being someone that was, gosh, and I really, because we're on air and this is public, this is hard for me to talk about because I can't let this be associated with any of my history, but this happened. He just was associated with some bad things. He did some bad things, he made some bad threats, and so he had to go. But the point is that they already had this perfect employee in the woman, but she was a strong-willed woman, and she didn't take crap from the kind of good old boy the good old boy gang out there. And so they ended up kind of getting rid of her and replacing her with people who are clearly below her caliber. That's something that I've seen in places where I've worked, and it's disheartening. So I think that for a lot of women, being an entrepreneur is very attractive, because there are a lot of now women groups out there. You see a lot of women's empowerment groups, for example, where women are doing a lot of networking with each other and really enjoying the fact that they are finding people who just want to work with them and not step over them.
I think you answered my next question, but I'll ask it anyway. If you had a blank check to solve that problem or that issue, what would your solution be?
Stop treating corporations like people and bring a little humanity back into the workplace. You know, it's not just a workplace thing. I think, honestly, it's just a wider cultural issue, and being in a very patriarchal society. And I think there just needs to be a little more balance, a little more value placed on the contributions that both sexes bring to the table, not just more value on the contributions that one sex brings over the other gender. So I think if more people's talents were just valued for their talents, regardless of whether their style of communication is what's expected in the workplace, because I think a lot of this boils down to our styles of communication. men a lot of times have that alpha style of communication. They just are, you know, from birth taught to be competitive and to be the top dog. And so when we go into a business boardroom situation, the men are going to be vocal, whereas women are oftentimes, especially if they're mothers, they're very much the placaters. They are the ones who keep peace in the household and make sure that everybody gets their fair share. And they're not necessarily doing it by being the alpha dog, but by making sure that everybody else's needs are met. And so if we're in a boardroom situation and we have two people and one's an alpha dog and the other one is busy making sure everybody's needs are being met, that person is making sure everybody's needs are being met. Even though they have really great contributions, those contributions might not have as much opportunity to be brought to the table just because of the communication dynamics. And so I think that a change in the underlying communication dynamics would really solve a lot.
And I agree with you. And you know, it's interesting we're on this track because. And I'm going somewhere with this to all 5,000 viewers that are out there. There's a real, and I'm trying to choose my words carefully here. I agree with everything you just said. And from a male perspective, and not my personal male perspective, but when you look at males in the workplace now, especially in the coaching, consulting, development group, where you suddenly see this influx, tremendous influx of females, it becomes very threatening to a lot of colleagues that I have. And it's, to me, I have a fairly high degree of vulnerability for a male, okay? Somewhere my daughters are probably rolling their eyes if they're watching this, but I have a fairly high degree of vulnerability that I've never been threatened by anything like that. But I know everything you're speaking. Go ahead.
Why do you think they feel threatened?
Well, because all of a sudden there's such a tremendous influx of females in the business environment that are earning 6-7 figures a year. They're conducting webinars, seminars where they are attracting female entrepreneurs to that lifestyle like magnets, and they sit back and they say, wait a minute, that's what we're supposed to be doing. Okay, it's kind of, I think, and this is just my personal opinion, it's almost kind of a, you should really know your place, and your place really isn't at the head of the line. Your place may be second in line, but just let me stay at the head of the line, which is why I asked you the question earlier about, okay, have things really changed? Are we telling people to look right, and we've just moved the issue over to the left?
Well, you know, I think it's really interesting that you're saying that the men are feeling threatened. And what I'm wondering is, in taking it back to communication styles, is it because before it was really the women who were expected to learn the communication styles of the men because they were always the ones that were more prevalent? But now the men are having to learn the communication styles of the women if they're being surrounded by so many of them, where the dynamics have changed a little bit. It's the men who are being expected to adapt a little more. And
well, I will tell you too. I will tell you too that there, another thing that goes into the mix is geography. Okay, I am dead in the middle of the country. Okay, I am in, depending on where you live, some people call where I live the South, some people call it the Midwest, some people call it the Mideast. There is a very different perspective in the middle of the country than there is on either coast. It is less flexible, and it still is the very much, I say it half kiddingly, that there's some places I know haven't even come into the 20th century yet, much less the 21st century. Okay? Um, so I think that plays a big part too. I think there are more environments open geographically simply because of the culture that exists in that geography that says we probably have a larger and broader perspective than other parts of the country or other parts of the world do. Um, I regularly mastermind with a coach, female coach in India, in New Delhi, and her husband will only allow her to do her business 8 hours a week.
Wow.
And yeah, that's and I'm like, gee, if I told my wife she could do anything just 8 hours a week, I mean, I'm sitting here going, okay. And she kind of looked at me and she said, John, that's just the way it is. I
Right.
mean, I'm in a country of 1 billion people, and they all think alike.
Right.
So I think that goes into the mix too.
I think this is one of the draws of entrepreneurship too, because it takes us out of our local borders and allows us to do business across local borders. If our town is very, very conservative and we don't fit in their square peg holes, or we're round, what is it? Square peg and round hole. If we're the square pegs and the town is full of round holes, well, we can go online and start looking for some square holes to fit in. So, but I'd like to kind of bring this back sort of to branding, because to be honest, I mean, I'm just sharing my own experiences and observations and thoughts on it, but I'm not a
Hmm.
I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a person who studies cultures and dynamics like that. These are just my personal observations and experiences that I've had. But that gets back to why your personal branding really is so important, whether you're going for a job interview, as you were talking about last week, or whether you're going out as an entrepreneur. You do have to know, for example, if you're going to a lot of local networking mixers, you have to know the culture of the people in the location where you're living. So, for example, I've talked to a couple other business shows. There's a show called Women in Business Today that's very good. And they did a show on networking, and they were talking about proper dress for networking. And it was very much oriented towards make sure you're looking very businesslike. Make sure you're wearing, something sort of very businesslike to these networking mixers. But let me tell you, in Palm Springs, you're going to go to a networking mixer and you're going to find at least half the people there wearing like Hawaiian shirts and sandals, because that's just the way it is here. This is the culture here. When it is 110 degrees, you're not going to find people wearing long sleeve business shirts and suit jackets. It's just not going to happen. They're going to be wearing shorts and sandals and shirts. Now, they're going to be clean, they're going to be nice, they're not going to have stains all over them, but they may not be traditional business. Plus, there are so many mom and pop businesses here. The only really large employers out here are hospitality, really, hotels and restaurants and casinos. Other than that, it's all small businesses, small business owners, lots of solopreneurs. And so they are not necessarily dealing with corporate people who live in a suit and tie environment. They are dealing with people who wear Hawaiian shirts and sandals. So it's knowing the culture of where you're going, and your personal branding, especially if you're a solopreneur, you are representing your company. You're the face of your company. I have a friend, she's always telling me, people don't do business with companies. People do business with people. And so your personal branding is your translating into your company branding when we're talking about a solopreneur and a small business level. And the reason we go out to these networking meetings is because we want to meet the people. We want to start making connections. We start building relationships so that when those people that we meet and those connections that we make think, I have a need for this service, who do I go to? Well, you're the person that pops up in their mind, because you've been seeing them at the networking mixers, you've been interacting with them online, you've been hanging out with them or commenting on their events, you've been, sharing their posts, etc. So it's really, again, it goes back to always building those relationships, making those connections.
I guess the reason I want, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot with some of those questions. Well, no, yeah, I did. Okay. Uh, I guess the reason I did that was because there's a traditional track when we talk to people about branding, and I found it's very academic. Okay. You do A, you do B, you do C. We don't teach some of the stuff you just shared in seminars, in webinars, in focus groups and cohorts, whatever you want, in college classes. We just don't do it. And I think one of the real tragedies to me is that people get into that solopreneur world. They have a brand in the back of their head. They're ready to take the world by storm, and they fall into some of the potholes that you talked about without being aware of them. And I think if you're aware, I'm not going to say you're not going to trip and fall, but at least you're going to be able to see them 3 or 4 feet before you fall in.
Right, exactly. And you know, that really goes to, this is what strategy thinking really encompasses. It's seeing the forest, even though you have all the trees in front of you. So many people get caught up with the trees. They don't see the forest. And with the strategy, it's a lot of the big picture. Well, let's look at the big picture. What's happening in our culture that affects how our business might be doing? What's happening in our local environment, our local community that might affect what's happening with our business? What's happening on a larger scale with the shift in cultural thinking that might be affecting what's happening with our business? And an example we see of that is how everybody is wanting to go green now. And then we see the rise of greenwashing, where they're trying to appear green more than they're actually committed to actually being green. So a company that starts changing its packaging to using colors that are green friendly or green branded and saying, you know, we're doing this, versus the company that actually is taking that cradle to grave approach to their product development, where they're thinking about the materials, the source materials that go into their product, and how are those materials being sourced? Are they, you know, coming from sweatshops? Are they coming from chemical ingredients that are bad for the earth and the environment and our bodies? Or are we using maybe recycled materials and helping solve the question and taking that product development not just only as far as how do I sell it and then I don't ever have to think about it again, but when this product's shelf life is done, how does it break down? Does it break down? Does it end up in the trash? Can it be recycled? Where does it go from there? So it's more of a whole circle approach, and this company is actually really being green versus the company that's just changing their packaging and their marketing messages a little without necessarily changing their product development so much.
So if I hear what you're saying correctly, you're saying that what I have to really sell is myself, and that when I create a brand that's full of honesty, integrity, and all those things that I believe in, I have the opportunity to stand out, as
Yeah.
opposed to just simply saying, okay, I'm going to be a solopreneur and I'm going to be a career development coach, and you should really use me because I'm a wonderful guy to be around.
Right, right. You have to earn your good brand reputation. You're not just creating your brand identity. You're not just creating your reputation. You actually have to go out and earn it too. When you make a plan about, okay, this is what I want to be perceived as. Well, if you want to be perceived as good, as trustworthy, as holding to your word, then you have to actually be good and trustworthy and hold to your word. So you have to earn that reputation, not just say, I'm going to send these marketing messages out and create it.
I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. I had an experience just the other day. it's probably one of the few very unpleasant experiences I've had in 15 years, but I actually had to turn a client away who was ready to do business with me. And I would have just simply been taking their money. That's all I would have been doing. Because in the 2 hours we talked, I didn't feel they were prepared to benefit from what I could offer them. And if they couldn't benefit from it, then my feeling was you're just wasting your money. And you know, it's one of those things with don't tell me what you think, tell me what you feel. I just walked away from our initial meeting thinking, you know what, this is not going to work. And fortunately, on the drive home in the car, they felt the same thing. Sent me a text message and said, maybe we just better hold off on this. That could be a very lonely feeling when you have to do something like that. Because the mortgage company doesn't understand integrity all the time.
Right. But, you know, like anything else, I think there's always the silver lining, right, to every cloud. I had a similar situation where I was working with somebody who wanted some. I have a background as a graphic designer, and so I was working on a logo and some marketing pieces for a lovely woman who had a really neat pet sitting service, and we had a meeting, and it was great, and I totally thought that I understood what she was talking about, and I totally thought we were kind of on the same level. And I came up with these designs, and I was looking at them going, oh, this is great. She's going to love this. You know, I love this. She's going to love this. And she just was not feeling it, and she just wasn't hitting it. And then when I started getting a better idea of what she had in her mind and what she wanted, I was just like, ew, oh, no. And so what we ended up doing was just parting ways amicably and saying pretty much what you just said, that, you know, I love your business, I love your service. And she was very nice. She paid me out for the work that I had done. And I was like, well, you know what, we don't need to finish this contract, so don't worry about the rest, because find a designer that is going to better suit you and give you what you're looking for and be able to feel it. And I even recommended a few other designers to her. So that ended up being fine, because then at networking mixers later on, she still gave me a nice shout out and said, you know, it didn't work out, but she was really fair and it was really great. She even referred me to some other people, and her stuff was wonderful. It just wasn't me, and I still got good referrals out of it. So, you know, that's why I also think that I meet some people sometimes and they have a very competitive mindset. That person does the same thing I do. I don't want them on my show. Well, you know what? I welcome it. No, that's fine. Come on my show. Because another thing that you can say to a potential client, for example, who you approach them and they say, oh, I already have somebody who does this. Well, you can say, well, gee, you know, if your designer is ever too full and can't fit you in the schedule, please keep me in your roster as your second choice. And you can come to me and I will help you, and I won't try to steal you away from your regular designer, but I'll help you get through those times. And so there may come a time when their regular designer has their plate too full, they need something right away, they can't accommodate them, and then they'll come back to me and I can accommodate them. Or I'll say to the other designer, hey, you know, if you ever are, your plate is too full and you need some help and you want to outsource some stuff, consider me an outsource. I will totally do it under the umbrella of your business and meet with the client under the umbrella of your business. So, you know, we can always help each other out. And as you said, so many people go by how they feel with a person. If you're just not feeling it with this person over here, they might feel it with you. And that's all good too.
So let me summarize here for a minute, okay? When you create a brand, you need to be true to that brand. That brand needs to reach a certain niche, and everything's not always a storybook ending.
Right.
Sometimes you got to take the lemons and you got to make some lemonade out of it. Good.
But that's like anything else in life. I mean, that's just life.
Exactly. Exactly. I told somebody the other day, I believe if you turn the dictionary to L, it's under the word life. So, again, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I'm going to give you a few minutes to share something you've got going on. What do you got going on that you'd like to share with us?
Oh my goodness. I think I will choose, okay, I will choose my business club.
Okay.
As someone who does a lot of workshops and trainings through Hangouts and to my local audience, what I found was that people would come in and they would learn some new skill. They would learn social media marketing 101. But then when I would follow up with them, when I saw them at the next mixer or next spoke to them, I'd say, so what have you done? What have you been doing? I've been watching your socials and I'm not really seeing you put what you're doing into action. And it's like they learn it, but they are still sort of blocked or not motivated. It's just not being put into action. So I actually created a membership club that is a monthly club, and it is very affordably priced for solopreneurs because, again, I live in an area that's mostly mom and pop small businesses with a small budget. And in that club, they join a private community that I have on Google+. We do workshops every month, sometimes a couple workshops a month, depends on what my members want to learn about. I'll do just video lessons. Like today I did a video, it was 20 minutes long, but it was a discussion about building their audiences because I give them homework. And their homework was to start going out and building their audiences on their socials. A lot of these members are a little bit new to doing socials. So it was 20 minutes because I first spoke about what are some of the ways to do that, how to think about their social media, because a lot of it is a mental block, and I relate it to networking. How often do you go to a networking mixer? How much time do you spend at that mixer? How long does it take you to drive at that mixer? How long does it take you to drive back from that mixer? How much time did you spend prepping for it, figuring out who you want to connect with, what you're going to say, and what you want to accomplish? And then how much time do you spend in follow-up, sending your follow-up messages to the people that you met there? Because they're always saying, well, how much time do I have to spend on social media? Like it's the worst thing in the world. I'm like, well, no. Just like it's more networking mixers. It's just instead of being on location, you're now taking it beyond your borders, but it's still networking. It's making those connections and building relationships. And so if you spent 4 hours on this mixer over here, then don't balk at the thought of spending 4 hours on your social media because you're spending it networking. That's just what it takes. You want to go out there. So I spend some time talking about, that system of thinking about it and then giving them some tips on how to build up their audiences by going and, for example, joining in on HOAs, leaving comments in the comments underneath, joining the conversation on topics that they're interested in and can serve to audiences that they can serve, just to get their name out there. Because when I'm social on other people's HOAs, it always benefits me. I get new people that contact me afterwards and say, hey, I saw you on this, that was really great, blah, blah, blah. So connections are made, and then I give them their homework assignment. So that's probably the thing that I did mention. It's called Meilani's Blooming Business Club, and you can find out about it on my website, MeilaniMacDonald.com, which is right there in my lower third.
And you just answered my next question. If we want to get hold of you, how do we do that? I think or feel that that last answer really summed up everything you spoke to this evening. At least it did for me. I think you coalesced everything on that branding avenue of a small business owner or an entrepreneur into that initiative you're now offering to your client base, and I think that's a great thing. I also think that the planets are aligned so greatly because as we get ready to close tonight, I want to tell you about our guest next week, and it's going to be Mr. James Fierce, and he's going to talk about the Team Referral Network, okay? And I thought as you were talking, man, I couldn't have set this up any better myself. James is Meilani knows him. Many of you know him. He's extremely passionate about team referral. He's going to be talking. I'm not going to steal any of his thunder. I want you to tune in next week. James is going to be talking about a real exciting opportunity that people are going to have in the HOA communities to participate in. And he is part of a mastermind group I'm in, and we were talking last night, and he was sharing a lot of what was going on. And I said, how'd you like to be on my Hangout next week and just talk about some of this to people? So certainly want you back here next week. Meilani, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us. I appreciate it, and I know our viewers appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And you shared with me that I'm the first ever guest you had on your HOA.
Yep.
And I think it's such a big honor. Thank you so much.
Well, that's okay. I survived this.
You told
Okay.
me that.
Okay. Go ahead.
No, I just said it made my night when you told me that. That was.
Oh, well, that's great. I'm glad I made somebody's night. Well, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in, and we're going to end the Hangout now, and I will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.